Welcome back, everybody. Last time we talked a little bit about persuasion theory. I wanted to take it the next step and think about strategic communications, public relations. And this is really important when we think about agricultural communications, applied communications, because there are a ton of crises that we could talk about in agriculture, whether it's hoof and mouth, BSE, E. coli, animal welfare, runoff, soil erosion, water quality. It goes on and on. There's a lot of issues that happen in agriculture that hit this sort of crisis stage. A lot of times because people don't understand agriculture or don't have literacy in that area. So when things happen in terms of a public relations event, a lot of education needs to be done and people are scared, and it sort of becomes a crisis because by the time it boils up into the mass media, it's hit that point. Very similar to things like H1N1. While a crisis became a crisis for agriculture even more when people kept calling it the swine flu. So it's important that we sort of look at things. And one of the first things people look at is sort of the risk perceptions and how people individually perceive risks. Some people are more sensitive to risk. You'll notice that there are some people who are very involved in where their food comes from, whether food is organic. And then there's some who are less sensitive and just sort of accept the way things are and move on because in that area their perceived risk isn't great. They sort of trust, have this overarching trust. And everything that we do in terms of communication is sort of evaluated as being threatening or endangering the loss of trust. So are we keeping trust as we do our public relations? Okay? And the more graphically visual the risk a lot of times in communications, the more salient it is to people and the more people become more sensitive to a risk. For example, I'm sure you can think of agricultural issues that are very graphically visual. HSUS loves to put out videos of downer cows or cows being abused, the Chipotle videos that we talked about last time, the chicken being pumped with hormones. It's very visual and it shows risk and it makes it more salient to people and makes it more of a loss of trust happening and more sensitive to that issue. So what happens is we have this sort of public relations. Public relations, by definition, it's a management function to maintain mutually beneficial relationships. So public relations is basically relationship management and making sure that we have communication that is internal and external and is two-way and inclusive. So it's public relations within your company, with outside of your company, that's building trust and is building attitude, a positive attitude toward the company. It's making sure everybody feels inclusive, so there's attitude and behavioral change related to that company. So sometimes it is a purchasing process. Sometimes it is just a attitudinal change in terms of after, let's say Oprah talked about the value of beef and beef not being good and her not eating beef, there was a public relations push to combat that, to how sort of build trust back up with consumers on the value of beef. So a lot of times there's steps in relationship management that public relationship will do. First, a lot of times there's too little information for public to change and form opinion. So we're continually working to build information, put information out. To build that relationship, we need to have stuff there for people to build opinion on. And there's also times when we can over-communicate from an organization. If we're continually putting information out, it can cause people to mistrust. They may not trust us because we're continually telling us how wonderful we are. Unfortunately, public relations as it began was very much a persuasive, one-way type of thing that caused a lot of people to mistrust public relations professionals. And what we found with relationship management is the face-to-face has to be there to restore and sort of build trust, which is a very interesting concept when we think about today's society of social media. What is face-to-face talking to you via email, or is it literally face-to-face needed to restore and build trust? And sometimes it's just the idea of the openness of a relationship that's needed to build that trust. Values and services aren't necessarily the biggest issue. The way they relate and perceive is most important. So the way the consumer perceives you as a company, okay? And a lot of times they need to personify the organization to the stakeholders, to make them identify, form coalitions around the organization's perspective of an issue. And we see this a lot. HSCOS is such a great case study of this, because they are personifying what they believe within their advertisements and their communications and their campaigns, forming coalitions of people around this issue, around this perspective, building that relationship. There are a couple different PR models that we'll talk about. The first one's sort of the normative, and this is sort of the base early on PR model. The ideal model that we tell everything, honesty in all situations, no matter the consequences. Honesty over time has shown to be stronger for building public trust, loyalty. A great example of this is the Wendy's case of the needle in the food versus Exxon Valdez oil spills. The one company was very upfront and open and showed everything that was happening, and over time continued that trust in the company, where the other company decided they weren't going to give every piece of information, they weren't 100% honest in everything, and public trust and loyalty went down. We also do sort of this publicity model. This was really early on, but still is used some today in conjunction with some of the other models, but basically publicity in terms of celebrities doing things, celebrities promoting things, and not necessarily advertisement, but publicity. However, the four main models you'll see in public relations go back to Grunig. Grunig came up with these four models that you'll see a lot in most of the public relations research, and you'll see a lot as well in agricultural communications. First was sort of this press agentry idea, and Gruning's models, two of them are one way and two are a two-way. And press agentry is one that is a one-way, and it's often an exaggerated form, and the receiver gets no input. So the company is putting all of its information out there, and it was one of those beginning ones, but a lot of consumers mistrusted it, saw it as propaganda. They weren't, looking at communication outcomes. They were looking at just giving their message out there. A lot of times we see this sometimes in sports, where they'll be putting this wonderful information out about this athlete. Public information models, again, is another one way, but it's more emphasis on information than persuasion. So this is one, if we think about why our press agency was very much a beginning model. Public information was early on, but it's still very much in use. If we think about government information, they tend to just disseminate info. It's one way. They want to inform the public of an issue, so of a recall, of a health issue out there. CDC sends out alerts when there's mumps on campus. So public information, it's still viable in some contemporary PR, but a lot of times they're just informing. And a lot of times you'll see that the person who is in the company that does this is more of just like an in-house journalist who's just sending out press releases. Gruning's other two models are his two-way models. There's a two-way asymmetrical and a two-way symmetrical. The asymmetrical is two-way communication, but it's very imbalanced. It's based in persuasion and manipulation. So it sort of goes back to one of the older models, sort of that press agentry, but it is talking with the public. It is understanding what the public is. They don't necessarily go out and research and understand what the public opinion is, but they do have discussion with the public in a need to persuade and manipulate. Gruning's fourth model then was the two-way symmetrical model, and this is one that we see being used a lot more today. It's two-way communication. It's very balanced. They want to understand their public opinion, and they want to solve conflict with the public, as well as promoting mutual understanding. And this is what we see a lot of times, a lot of the agricultural agencies are doing now with some of the topics that have come out. They want to confirm with consumers the truth about a product, but also showing understanding of their opinions and where they're coming from, and sort of getting this mutual understanding of what is real and what is wrong when it comes to maybe the quality of beef or organics or what have you. There are a couple theories that we'll see beyond the PR models. Excuse me. Contingency theory is sort of one of the first ones. And what this is it's changing the belief that we can change PR models based on the situation. So at some instances, we may just be a one-way press agentry or public information. Then when something happens, so if you're the United Pork Board, you're just doing press information, you're just sending out to inform people, one-way communication. But when something happens, when H11 comes into play, we have to change our model. Okay, and a lot of times you see sort of your leadership and your structure is based on the situation at hand. Okay, so it's very contingent on the situation. Murphy in '96 came up with the idea of the chaos theory, and this was sort of an alternate model for organizing and communicating. And what it did was it emphasizes uncertainty. It was very open-ended plurality, and said change, the only thing constant is going to be this change. You know, there's no static thing that we can follow. Where a lot of the other theories were very set in certain situations, certain models that you would follow in those areas. Chaos said, you know, the research is going to help address the issue in talking to people, and it's going to show us what to say, what to do for that situation, but it's continually changing, and we're continually going to have to research and follow up with issues and understand what to do in each crisis situation. There's the complexity theory. Murphy in 2000 talked a lot about this. And the complexity theory sort of accepts the loss of control. It understands that a crisis or some situation, we lose control and we shift our roles throughout the situation. Okay? And we shift our communication. And as the situation adjusts and goes ebbs and flows, our communication pattern is going to ebb and flow to fit with that. And those who are involved adjust to each new crisis at each time. So it's more, instead of a one-way static thing, it's still, you know, you'll notice these newer models and these newer theories are, we go with the flow, we go with the shifting roles of society, of the crisis. No one thing is the same. McGuire came out with a matrix, and what he said was there's things that had to come into play for a successful campaign. And he sort of took that communication model we looked at early on, that source, message, channel, receiver, and said there's more to it. We have these mediating processes that are going to come into play as well. We have to look at someone's attention. Are they putting attention to it? Is there a comprehension of the message? Do they understand? Do they yield? Do they accept this channel? And does the receiver retain this information? So there's these mediating processes that affect these outcomes. So if a source is attentive, they're going to be aware. If they understand the message There can be attitudinal change, okay? If the channel, they accept it, there's belief change. And if the receiver retains all that, there's the behavioral change. So McGuire sort of set up this matrix so as we start thinking about a communication theory, which ones we have to follow through. And then through the life cycle of public relation theories came this idea of values and lifestyle behaviors that we needed to be aware of. And basically it said advertising and consumer behavior had to be a level of awareness. Where people are in their life cycle, where they are in their values is going to make a huge difference in some of these ideas that McGuire said, you know, your attention, your comprehension. Some of it goes back to that persuasion stuff that we talked about before. You know, if you're a bachelor, what campaign works with you may not work with somebody who's married without children or married with children. Core values like your religion, your beliefs, your culture, all of those values and lifestyle behaviors are going to affect how a campaign will be successful or not with that individual person. A couple of the other theories, situational theory was done by Grunig and Hunt, and Grunig sort of went back to his 4 models, his press agentry, his public information, his two-way models. And he said that public action is going to be based on a couple different things. And some of that was the knowledge and awareness of the situation, their level of involvement in the situation, and their perceptions of behavior. And he said that the variables predicting information processing and information seeking in a situation was going to be very dependent on the activity level of the public. Okay, so he's decided that they described 4 different publics, and they related these to their 4 models as well. Non-publics, not affected, not aware. So they weren't really affected, they really didn't care, they're not aware of the situation. The latent publics. The latent publics are, they would be affected, but they're not really aware. Okay? And then we have, so the latent public could be somebody who's got a product in their freezer that was recalled, they're affected by it, but they're not really aware that it's happening. Okay? Non-public, not aware, you know, it's, let's say it is college students' notebooks are being recalled. Not affected, not aware. Awareness publics, they have a high level of awareness and attitude, but they really aren't involved. So, for example, somebody who is aware of animal welfare issues, they have a high level of awareness, they care about it, they understand it, but they're not doing anything about it. And then there's the active. They're very aware, they're very involved, like I said, they're very active, and they have a behavior and no constraints. This would be somebody who is worried about animal welfare and maybe out protesting. Okay, and so which model you use can be dependent on which one of these models. So that press agentry, one way, might be that unaware group, where the public information, the press agentry may be sort of that unaware, latent. The public information would be those people who maybe are affected but unaware, so they need to be made aware. The two-way symmetrical would be those who are active, and then that asymmetrical would then be looking at those who are just aware. McCombs, Shaw, and Gray came out in '76 and had their own theory as well, that we tends to explain a lot of things in terms of crisis communication and the way crisis communication sort of ebbs and flows. They came out and said that there are always these latent issues that are going to be triggered by events. And we're going to discuss them, and we're going to develop positions, we're going to solutions, and we're going to act, and then something else is going to come up and replace them in our minds. So it's sort of the ebb and flow then of that crisis. So, for example, gun control. If we're looking at it in terms of issue attention theory, when there is a shooting at a school, all of a sudden there's this triggering event, and we're going to discuss it. We're going to discuss gun control. We're going to develop our positions on gun control based on the information that's out there. We're going to discuss some solutions, and then we may act on that solution. And this is something that we see a lot in agriculture, this sort of issue attention theory. When there's recalls or there's E. coli breakouts or mad cow, citrus canker down in Florida, the disease that's going through the pig industry right now, they're very issue attention triggered events that we discuss, we talk about, and we move on. And this sort of comes into, as we think about behavioral communication and the model of how we communicate to change behavior, there's these 4 sort of stages that public awareness moves through, and a campaign must move through. We have to first bring up awareness. When there's a communication that starts, we've got to build public awareness, and we've got to get latent readiness. We've got to get people we need to get our publics more active or more aware. And then we're going to have some type of triggering event, something that causes people to talk about it, to where they will slowly change their attitude, change their behavior, based on this communication model. And so as we think about different things, so maybe it's a non-smoking campaign. We need to get people aware of the issue, have it more out in the public, doing more events, getting people who are latent to understand how it affects them. Then we have these events, so maybe it's a rally, a big display at something, a big show, and those events trigger, hopefully, that discussion and then that change. So in terms of triggering events, there's tons of different triggering events that we can think about. They can be planned, like a rally against a bill at the State House, or they can be a crisis event, an event that the consequences are less controllable and a lot of times can be more negative. So a triggering event could be us having a huge fair out on the Oval talking about organic foods, and that triggering event is going to raise the awareness, have more people talking about it, more people hopefully changing attitudes, belief. Or it could be an E. coli breakout in one of the food stations on campus, and this is a crisis event, and so it's going to trigger people talking about whether we should be organic or not, or what certain things we should be doing about food. It adds some consequences, can be negative, but causes us to move through. So my question to you is, do we have triggering events in agriculture? And it's almost a comical question, because when don't we have triggering events in agriculture? People are very latent when it comes to agriculture, so they don't necessarily understand what's happening. They may be aware, but they don't think it's, it may affect them, but they may not be aware. So it's sort of those 2 first publics that Grunig talked about that really come into play. You think about some of the things that we have today. The Chipotle, great case study right now. This is one of their billboards, a farm friendly. They've got all of these videos that are coming out, and they're putting out signs continuously about farm friendly, no antibiotics, all of these, signs, no factory farms. And they're putting these signs out. They're making the latent public aware. They're making them become aware. They're giving them events such as videos, press releases, billboards. They're triggering them to think about it and to act on it. Okay. Same thing, mad cow disease. When mad cow disease comes out, there's those triggering events of somebody being sick. We talk about it, we move through it. And sometimes it's a positive and negative. And so there's sort of these campaigns that may even conflict with each other in these situations. A great example, farms, yes, factory farms, no. We're not, we may be aware of it, but we're not acting on it. We understand that there's this issue, but we're not acting on it. How does a campaign take you through these steps? And so as we think about some of the research that we do and looking at public relations, where do these campaigns fall? Which one of these campaigns have been successful? What can we do as agriculturalists to do a successful campaign when we are having negative triggering events, negative crisis events like we do tend to a lot in agriculture? But then how do we also have non-negative triggering events to build relationship management? So hopefully, I think some of these theories might engage some of you guys a little bit differently than some of the ones we've talked about before, and maybe a little more relevant as you look at information campaigns, educational campaigns that you'll be thinking about in the future. So until next time, I will talk to you later.